Kethvaran had watched civilizations die for 300 years. He was a historian of the Valanthi Collective, one of the oldest species in the known galaxy. His people had mastered the art of survival through careful observation. They did not fight wars. They did not conquer worlds. They watched, they recorded, and they learned from the mistakes of others. In his long life, Kethvaran had seen things that would break the minds of younger beings. He had watched the proud Selthari Empire crumble in a single generation when the hive mind of Nexar came for them. He had documented the extinction of the crystalline lords, a species so ancient they had witnessed the birth of stars. He had recorded the fall of 17 civilizations, each one believing itself eternal, each one turning to dust. Nothing in all those centuries had prepared him for what he would see on the frozen plains of Thessar Prime. The planet was unremarkable by galactic standards. Cold, rocky, barely habitable. The humans had settled it 40 years ago, building a small colony they called New Anchorage. 12,000 people lived there, farming in underground greenhouses and mining the mountains for rare metals. It was the kind of settlement that existed on the edges of human space, small, struggling, far from help. It was exactly the kind of target the Dominion of Yithrak preferred. The Dominion was an empire built on conquest. Their warlords had consumed 2,000 worlds across 3 centuries. They did not negotiate. They did not trade. They took what they wanted, and they killed anyone who tried to stop them. Their fleet was vast, their soldiers bred for war, their reputation written in the ashes of dead civilizations. When the Dominion turned its attention to human space, the other species of the galaxy had expected quick surrender. Humanity was young. They had only possessed faster-than-light travel for 200 years. Their fleet was small, their territory modest, their technology unremarkable. They were, by all objective measures, no match for the Dominion. Kethvaran had been granted permission to observe the coming conquest. He traveled to Thessar Prime aboard his small observation vessel, positioning himself at a safe distance from the planet. He activated his recording equipment and settled in to document another routine slaughter. The Dominion fleet arrived at dawn, local time. 300 warships darkened the sky above New Anchorage. They were massive vessels, bristling with weapons, their hulls scarred from 100 campaigns. The flagship alone was larger than the entire human colony. It hung in the atmosphere like a mountain made of metal, blotting out the pale sun. Kethvaran watched the tactical feeds with professional detachment. He had seen this before. The Dominion would broadcast their demands. The colony would either surrender or be destroyed. Either way, it would be over within hours. He began composing the opening lines of his report in his mind. Then, something unexpected happened. A transmission burst from the colony's communication array, broadcasting on every open channel. It reached the Dominion fleet, the observation posts of a dozen species, and Kethvaran's own vessel simultaneously. A woman's face appeared on his screen. She was middle-aged, with tired eyes and gray streaks in her dark hair. Her name, according to the colony records, was Katie Reyes. She was the elected leader of New Anchorage, a former engineer who had helped build the settlement from bare rock. She did not look afraid. "This message is for the Dominion fleet in our orbit," she said. Her voice was steady, almost calm. "We know who you are. We know what you've done to other worlds. We've seen the recordings from Thalassar and Vorn Prime and all the others." Kethvaran leaned forward slightly. This was unusual. Most species, when faced with the Dominion, either begged or fled. Acknowledgement of past atrocities served no tactical purpose. Katie Reyes continued. "We're not stupid. We can count ships. We know we can't beat you in a straight fight." She paused, and something hard entered her eyes. "But we're not leaving. This is our home. These are our people. If you want this world, you're going to have to come down here and take it from us. And I promise you this, we will make you pay for every inch." The transmission ended. Kethvaran stared at his screen for a long moment. Then he replayed the message, studying the woman's face, searching for signs of madness or desperation. He found neither. She had meant every word. He checked his historical databases. Defiance before annihilation was not unheard of. Some species chose death over surrender, as a matter of honor or biology. But those cases typically involved warrior cultures with nothing to lose. New Anchorage was a farming colony. Its people were miners and teachers and shopkeepers. They had everything to lose. The Dominion commander responded to the transmission with a simple acknowledgement. Landing craft began deploying from the warships, descending toward the planet like metal rain. The warlord did not bother with threats or ultimatums. He had heard defiant speeches before. They never changed the outcome. Keth Voran adjusted his sensors to monitor the colony directly. He expected to see panic, evacuation attempts, perhaps some futile last-minute resistance. What he saw instead confused him. The people of New Anchorage were not running. They were digging in. He watched elderly men and women carrying weapons to defensive positions. He saw teenagers filling sandbags and reinforcing barricades. A group of children was being led into the underground shelters. But the adults were staying above ground, organizing themselves into something that looked almost like military units. Katie Reyes moved among them, speaking to each group in turn. Keth Voran could not hear what she was saying, but he could see the effect. People straightened. They checked their weapons. They looked at the darkening sky with something that was not fear. It was determination. Keth Voran had observed hundreds of species facing extinction. He had seen courage and cowardice, nobility and savagery, but he had never seen anything quite like this. These humans knew they were going to die. They had to know. The math was simple and brutal, and yet they were preparing to fight anyway. He made a note in his observation log, the first of many he would make over the coming days. He wrote it in the clinical language of his profession, but even then, something of his confusion bled through. Subject species displaying non-standard response to overwhelming force. Recommend continued observation. Preliminary assessment. Humans may be more complex than initial surveys suggested. He did not yet understand what he was seeing. He would not understand for many hours, not until the battle was over and the smoke had cleared and he stood in the ruins of New Anchorage, watching a mother hold her daughter and weep. But in that moment, watching 12,000 humans prepare to die for a frozen rock at the edge of nowhere, Keth Voran felt something he had not felt in 3 centuries of observation. He felt uncertain, and for a historian who had watched civilizations fall like leaves in autumn, uncertainty was the most unsettling feeling of all. The distress signal left New Anchorage at the speed of light, bouncing through relay stations across human space. It reached Earth in 17 hours. It reached the nearest military outpost in 12. It reached a small mining frigate in the asteroid fields of Kepler 442 inches, just under 6. Danny Vance was eating breakfast when the signal came through. He was 43 years old, a career miner who had spent the last 20 years pulling ore from rocks in the cold spaces between stars. His ship, the Dusty Runner, was old and slow and held together mostly by hope and welding tape. He had a crew of 8. A contract to deliver iron ore to a processing station, and exactly no military training whatsoever. He listened to the distress signal twice. Then he called his crew to the bridge. "The Dominion is hitting New Anchorage," he said. "Colony of about 12,000. They've got maybe a few hours before ground forces arrive." "Ah." His navigator, a young woman named Rosa, pulled up the tactical data. "Danny, we're a mining ship. What exactly do you think we can do?" "I don't know," Danny admitted. "But I know. I can't just sit here and listen to them die." He looked around at his crew. They were miners, not soldiers. They had families waiting for them, contracts to fulfill, lives to live. No one would blame them for staying out of it. The Dominion fleet was 300 ships strong. What difference could one broken-down ore hauler make? Rosa was the first to speak. "We'll need to dump the cargo. The ship's too heavy to make decent speed otherwise." Danny nodded slowly. "That's 3 months of work. We won't get paid." "I know." She was already calculating the course. "We can be there in 31 hours if we push the engines past safe limits." One by one, the rest of the crew voiced their agreement. No one asked questions. No one demanded explanations. They simply made their choice and got to work. Within an hour, the dusty runner had dumped 2,000 tons of iron ore into the void and was burning toward Thessar Prime at dangerous speed. Keth Voran intercepted the ship's new heading and added it to his observation log with a note of confusion. A mining vessel changing course toward an active war zone made no strategic sense. He assumed it was an error or perhaps a misguided rescue attempt that would end in destruction. Then he detected another course change, and another, and another. A hospital ship under the command of Dr. Laura Kim had been traveling to a refugee camp on the far side of the sector. When the distress signal reached her, she diverted immediately. Her staff did not ask questions. They began preparing for combat casualties while the ship was still in transit. A research vessel studying a pulsar, commanded by a scientist named Chris Novak, abandoned 10 years of irreplaceable data collection. The pulsar would not be in optimal position for study again for another century. Novak did not hesitate. He ordered his crew to pack essential equipment and set course for Thessar Prime. A passenger liner carrying 300 tourists changed heading despite the protests of its corporate owners. The captain, a woman named Maria Santos, sent a brief message to her employers. "Fire me later. People are dying now. Private yachts, cargo freighters, family shuttles, personal craft of every size and description. They came from every direction, converging on Thessar Prime like blood cells rushing to a wound." Keth Voran watched the sensor data with growing disbelief. None of these vessels had been ordered to respond. There was no central command directing them. No military authority coordinating their movements. They were simply coming, each one making the decision independently, each one choosing to fly toward almost certain death. He began intercepting their communications, trying to understand what was driving them. The messages he captured were not military dispatches or strategic discussions. They were personal, intimate, heartbreaking. A pilot named Ben Torres recorded a message for his daughter. His voice shook slightly as he spoke, but his words were clear. "I know you're scared, sweetheart. I'm scared too. But there are kids on that colony, just like you. And I can't live in a universe where we don't try to help them. If something happens to me, I need you to know that your daddy did the right thing. I love you more than all the stars in the sky." A young engineer named Sophie Walsh sent a message to her parents. "Mom, Dad, I know you're going to be angry. But I keep thinking about what you taught me when I was little. You said that good people don't look away when others are suffering. You said that doing the right thing is hard, and that's why it matters. I'm trying to be the person you raised me to be. I hope you understand." And an elderly veteran named George Palmer, who had fought in humanity's first war against an alien species decades ago, recorded no message at all. He simply set his course, checked his weapons, and waited. He had seen what the Dominion did to the worlds they conquered. He had seen the mass graves and the burned cities, and the empty streets where children used to play. He was 72 years old and his reflexes were not what they used to be. He was going anyway. Keth Voran catalogued each vessel, each message, each impossible choice. His confusion deepened with every passing hour. The Valanthi had survived for millennia by avoiding unnecessary risk. Self-preservation was the foundation of their civilization. The idea of deliberately flying into a battle you could not win, for people you had never met, was simply incomprehensible. He ran calculations, trying to find a logical explanation. Perhaps these humans expected reinforcements. Perhaps they believed the military would arrive in time. Perhaps they were operating under some strategic doctrine he did not understand. But the math did not support any of those theories. The nearest military fleet was at least 40 hours away. By the time it arrived, the battle would be long over. These civilians were flying toward Thessar Prime knowing they would arrive before help came. Knowing they would face the Dominion alone. They were not expecting to win. They were expecting to die. And they were coming anyway. As the hours passed and more ships altered course, Keth Voran found himself making a note that surprised even himself. He wrote, "Initial hypothesis regarding human behavior requires revision. This species does not appear to operate according to standard survival protocols. further observation necessary to determine nature of deviation. What he could not bring himself to write, what he could barely admit even in the privacy of his own thoughts, was simpler and more disturbing. He had watched civilizations for 3 centuries. He had seen species fight and flee and surrender and die. He had observed every possible response to the threat of extinction. He had never seen anything like this. And for the first time in his long career, Keth Voran began to wonder if he had fundamentally misunderstood what he was observing. These humans were not behaving like any species in his databases. They were not acting out of strategy or instinct or cultural programming. They were acting out of something else entirely. He did not yet have a name for it. But watching the sensors fill with converging ships, watching ordinary people abandon everything to fly toward death, he felt the first stirring of something that might have been awe or fear. He was not sure which. The human fleet that gathered above Thesser Prime was not impressive by Dominion standards. 47 vessels hung in the darkness of space, their running lights blinking against the stars. Some were military, a handful of patrol ships, and light cruisers that had been close enough to respond. But most were civilian craft, their hulls scarred by years of hard work, their weapons improvised or non-existent. Against them stood 300 Dominion warships. The flagship of the human force was a carrier called the Valiant. It was old, built nearly 50 years ago, its hull patched and repaired so many times that almost nothing remained of the original construction. Its captain was Admiral Nathan Cole, a career officer who had never commanded a fleet in actual combat. He was 56 years old, gray-haired and tired-eyed, and he knew exactly what he was facing. He gathered his officers on the bridge and spoke plainly. "I'm not going to lie to you," he said. "We're outnumbered 6 to 1. Most of our ships are civilian vessels with no combat training. The nearest reinforcements are still 30 hours away. By every standard measure, we cannot win this fight." He paused, looking at each face in turn. "But down on that planet, there are 12,000 people who are counting on us. Men and women and children who are going to die if we don't do something. Now, I can't order any of you to stay. If you want to fall back, wait for the main fleet. Nobody here will blame you." Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Admiral Cole nodded slowly. "All right then. Here's what we're going to do. We're not going to sit here and wait for them to come to us. We're going to attack." His tactical officer, a young man named Ryan Park, looked up from his console. "Sir, standard doctrine for an inferior force." "I know what standard doctrine says," Cole interrupted. "Standard doctrine says we should establish a defensive perimeter and try to hold until reinforcements arrive. Standard doctrine assumes the enemy will wait that long." He turned to the main view screen, where the Dominion fleet hung like a cloud of metal locusts. "But here's what I know about the Dominion. They don't expect prey to fight back. They've spent 300 years conquering species that ran or surrendered. They've never faced an enemy that came at them." He straightened his shoulders. "We're going to punch through their center. We're going to make them bleed. And we're going to buy every minute we can for those people on the ground." The order went out to every ship in the fleet. "Attack formation. All vessels advance." Keth Voran watched from his observation post with something close to disbelief. Inferior forces did not attack. It violated every principle of warfare, every instinct of survival. The humans had to know they were throwing themselves into a meat grinder. They had to understand that this attack would accomplish nothing strategically meaningful, and yet they advanced. The Valiant led the charge, its old engines straining as it picked up speed. Behind it came the patrol ships and cruisers, forming a wedge aimed directly at the heart of the Dominion formation, and behind them came the civilian ships, the miners and haulers and passenger vessels, armed with whatever weapons they could find, ready to fight and die alongside the warships. On the bridge of the Dominion flagship, Warlord Thesak watched the human advance with narrowed eyes. He had conquered dozens of worlds. He had faced species far more powerful than humanity. But he had never seen anything quite like this. His tactical advisor spoke hesitantly. "Warlord, they're attacking. I can see that. But why? They must know they cannot win." 2. Thesak had no answer. It made no sense. Everything in his experience, everything in the histories of his people, said that inferior forces should retreat, should negotiate, should find some way to survive. Self-preservation was the most basic instinct of any living thing. These humans seemed not to possess it. Destroy them, he ordered. All ships engage. The battle began. On the surface of Thesar Prime, Katie Reyes stood on the roof of the colony's administration building and watched the sky light up with weapons fire. The distant flashes looked almost beautiful, like a storm made of light. She knew that each flash meant death, human or dominion, ship or fighter, someone's husband or wife or child, gone forever. She pushed the thought aside. There was too much work to do. The colony had transformed in the hours since her broadcast. Every building had been fortified. Every street had been barricaded. The underground shelters were packed with children and elderly, and anyone who could not fight. Everyone else was armed and ready. A man named Sam Whitfield approached her. He was the colony's librarian. A soft-spoken man in his 50s, who had never fired a weapon in his life. He carried an old rifle that looked almost as uncomfortable in his hands as he looked holding it. "The Eastern Ridge," he said. "Command wants someone to hold it when the ground troops come. It's a good defensive position, but whoever's there will be cut off from retreat." Katie nodded. "They're asking for volunteers." "I'm volunteering." She studied his face. He was pale, his hands shaking slightly. He was terrified, but his voice was steady. "Sam, you're not a fighter." "No, I'm not," he agreed. "But someone has to do it. And I don't have anyone waiting for me. No wife, no children. If I die up there, I'm the only one who loses." He managed a small smile. "The young folks with families, they should be in the safer positions. Let an old bachelor take the risk." Katie wanted to argue. She wanted to tell him that his life mattered just as much as anyone else's, that being alone did not make him expendable. But she understood what he was really saying. In a situation where someone had to die, he was volunteering to be that someone so that others might live. She put her hand on his shoulder. "Thank you, Sam." He nodded once, turned, and walked toward the Eastern Ridge. She watched him go. This quiet man who had spent his life surrounded by books, now walking toward almost certain death because someone had to. Above them, the battle raged on. Ships exploded in silent flowers of fire. Escape pods tumbled through the void. Voices screamed on open channels, crying for help or calling out coordinates or simply saying goodbye. And still the humans fought. Kethvorin recorded it all. His instruments capturing every death, every sacrifice, every impossible act of courage. He had expected the battle to be brief, a few hours at most, before the humans were overwhelmed. But the hours stretched on, and the humans did not break. They were dying, they were losing, but they would not stop fighting. The historian made another note in his log, his usual clinical detachment cracking for the first time. Subject species continues to resist despite overwhelming odds. Casualty rates exceed 50%. No signs of surrender or retreat. Hypothesis: humans may not be capable of surrender in any meaningful sense. This requires further investigation. What he did not write, what he could not yet admit even to himself, was that he was beginning to understand something. These humans were not fighting because they thought they could win. They were not fighting for territory or resources or survival. They were fighting because the alternative, abandoning those people on the planet below, was simply unacceptable. They would rather die than leave. And that, Kethvorin was beginning to realize, was the most terrifying thing he had ever witnessed. The battle lasted 19 hours. 19 hours of fire and death and desperate courage. 19 hours of ships exploding and voices going silent, and human beings throwing themselves against an enemy they could not defeat. Kethvorin watched it all, his recording equipment capturing every moment, his mind struggling to process what he was seeing. The human fleet was being destroyed. That much was obvious from the first hour. The Dominion's weapons were too powerful. Their ships too numerous. Their tactics too refined. One by one, the human vessels fell, cruisers and patrol ships and civilian craft alike, reduced to burning wreckage, drifting through the void. But they did not run. And somehow, impossibly, they kept fighting. The destroyer, relentless, took a direct hit to its engine core in the 7th hour. Captain Megan Ortiz was young, barely 30, with a husband waiting for her on Earth and a daughter she had never met. When the damage reports came in, she knew her ship was dying. The engines were gone. Life support was failing. The Relentless was nothing but a burning hulk, drifting helplessly through the battle. She ordered her crew to the escape pods. "Everyone out," she said, her voice calm despite the smoke filling the bridge. "That's not a request. That's an order." Her first officer hesitated. "Captain, what about you?" Megan was already at the helm controls, her hands moving across the console. "The maneuvering thrusters are still online. I can steer this wreck. And there's a Dominion dreadnought about 6,000 kilometers off our port bow." Understanding dawned on his face. "Megan, go. Now. Tell my husband I love him. Tell him to show our daughter the stars." She piloted the burning destroyer into the heart of the enemy formation. The Dominion dreadnought tried to evade. But the Relentless was coming too fast, its trajectory too precise. Megan Ortiz's last transmission was the coordinates of her family's home in Montana. "Tell my father I made it count," she said. Then the Relentless struck the dreadnought, and both ships vanished in a ball of nuclear fire. Keth Voran recorded the impact with trembling hands. He had seen suicide attacks before. They were not uncommon among desperate species, but there had been something in Megan Ortiz's voice, not desperation, not rage, but a terrible calm acceptance that he could not forget. On the surface of Thessar Prime, the Dominion ground forces landed in the 9th hour. Dropships descended through the atmosphere, disgorging thousands of Ythrak soldiers onto the frozen plains surrounding New Anchorage. They were massive creatures, bred for war over countless generations, their bodies armored and their weapons designed to destroy. They had conquered 1,000 worlds. A single farming colony should have taken them hours to overwhelm. It took them 3 days. Every street became a battlefield. Every building became a fortress. The colonists fought with rifles and improvised explosives and farming equipment modified into weapons. They fought in the open and from the shadows, in organized units and as individuals, with strategy and with pure stubborn refusal to die. Ethan Marsh was 67 years old. He had been a teacher before he retired, spending 30 years helping children learn to read and write. He had never been a soldier. He had never wanted to be one. He held the gymnasium of the colony's school for 3 hours. The building was important. It sat at a crossroads that controlled access to the underground shelters where the children were hiding. If the Dominion took it, they would have a clear path to the most vulnerable people in the colony. Someone had to hold it. Ethan volunteered. He had a hunting rifle and about 100 rounds of ammunition. He barricaded the doors with gymnasium equipment, overturned the bleachers to create cover, and waited. When the Dominion soldiers came, he was ready. He killed 7 of them before they realized where the fire was coming from. He killed 3 more before they figured out how to approach the building without being shot. When they finally breached the doors, he was waiting with a knife and a fire extinguisher and 67 years of stubborn determination. They found him dead at the entrance to the back corridor, his body blocking the door. Behind him, the passage led to the shelters. The children were safe. A teenage girl named Hannah Cole, Admiral Nathan Cole's niece, spent 16 hours guiding civilians through the sewer system beneath the colony. She was 17 years old. She had been planning to apply to university next year, to study medicine like her mother. Instead, she crawled through tunnels in the darkness, leading groups of frightened people past enemy patrols, keeping them quiet and calm and alive. She saved 237 people before a Dominion patrol finally caught her. She was captured, not killed. The Ythrak wanted prisoners, wanted information about the colony's defenses. Hannah gave them nothing. When they found her a day later, after the battle was over, she was barely conscious, but still defiant, still refusing to speak. The medic who treated her wounds, a man named Aaron Park, had his own story. He had been running through the streets during the 15th hour of the battle, trying to reach a group of wounded civilians trapped in a collapsed building. A Dominion soldier shot him in the leg. He kept running. Another shot hit his shoulder. He kept running. He reached the building and started dragging wounded people out. One by one, he pulled them toward the nearest shelter, leaving a trail of his own blood behind him. He made 3 trips before his body finally gave out. He collapsed 10 feet from the shelter entrance, his hands still gripping the jacket of the last person he was trying to save. That person survived. So did the 2 before her. Aaron Park died in the street, surrounded by the people he had saved. Kethvoran watched it all. He watched old men and young women and middle-aged teachers and teenage students throw themselves against an enemy that should have destroyed them. He watched them die in ways that made no sense, sacrificing themselves for strangers, choosing death over retreat, fighting long past the point when any rational being would have surrendered. The Yithrak had studied human biology before the invasion. They knew that humans were physically fragile compared to most species. They bruised easily. Their bones broke. They required constant hydration and careful temperature regulation. On paper, they should have been simple to conquer. But the Yithrak had not studied human history. They did not know about Thermopylae, where 300 soldiers held a pass against an empire. They did not know about Stalingrad, where a city refused to fall despite everything that was thrown against it. They did not know about all the times throughout history when humans had chosen to stand and die rather than run and live. They were learning now. In the 19th hour of the battle, something changed. The Dominion forces, which had been advancing steadily through the colony, began to slow. Their communications became confused, uncertain. For the first time, the Yithrak soldiers were encountering something they did not understand. Every human they killed was replaced by another. Every position they took was contested. Every street they advanced through cost them casualties that no strategic calculation could justify. They were winning, they had to be winning, but the victory felt hollow, wrong, impossible. They had conquered 1,000 worlds. None of them had fought like this. And slowly, for the first time in their long history of conquest, the Dominion began to hesitate. Reinforcements arrived on the 20th hour, but they were not the military fleet that everyone had been waiting for. The human navy was still 16 hours away, pushing their engines to destruction, trying to arrive in time. What came instead was something Kethvoran had not anticipated. Civilian ships, hundreds of them. They poured out of faster-than-light travel like water bursting from a dam. Freighters and passenger liners and private yachts and personal shuttles, each one crewed by ordinary people who had heard the battle on open communication channels and decided to come. They had no weapons worth mentioning. They had no training. They had no chance of survival if they engaged the Dominion directly. They came anyway. Tyler Vance was aboard the first wave. He was Danny's younger brother, and he had been listening to the battle communications for 18 hours, hearing his brother's voice among the chaos. Danny had survived so far. His mining ship had somehow made it through the worst of the fighting, but Tyler knew the odds were getting worse by the minute. He had a small cargo hauler, designed for short-range transport. It was not meant for combat. It was barely meant for long-distance travel. He pushed it until the engines screamed, until the hull groaned, until warning lights covered every console. When he arrived at Thesser Prime, he did not hesitate. A Dominion troop carrier was descending toward the planet, carrying reinforcements for the ground assault. Tyler aimed his ship directly at it and accelerated. He had time to send one message to his brother: "See you on the other side." The hauler struck the troop carrier at full speed. Both ships disintegrated. 400 Dominion soldiers died before they could reach the ground. A woman named Claire Ashford owned a luxury yacht. She had spent her life in comfort, traveling between resort worlds, never wanting for anything. She had no military experience, no combat skills, no reason to be here, but she had watched the feeds from New Anchorage. She had seen the footage of children being led into shelters, of teachers picking up rifles, of ordinary people choosing to die rather than abandon their neighbors, and something in her chest had tightened, something that would not let her look away. She positioned her yacht between the evacuation shuttles and a Dominion cruiser. Her ship absorbed 3 direct hits meant for the shuttles. The 4th hit destroyed her. But by then, the shuttles had escaped. 147 civilians survived because Claire Ashford had decided that their lives were worth more than hers. The Dominion commanders watched these new arrivals with something that might have been confusion, or fear, or both. Their tactical displays showed civilian vessels everywhere, swarming like insects, throwing themselves against warships they could not possibly damage. Warlord Thesak stared at the chaos on his view screen. He had conquered dozens of worlds. He had faced species far more technologically advanced than humanity. He had never faced anything like this. "What are they doing?" he demanded. "These ships have no weapons. They cannot hurt us." His advisor had no answer. Neither did anyone else on the bridge. The Dominion had studied human military capabilities. They had analyzed human technology, and human tactics, and human fleet deployments. They understood how humanity fought wars. They did not understand why a species would throw civilians into a battle they could not win, simply because people they had never met were dying. In the 22nd hour, Warlord Thesak gave an order he had never given before: retreat. His fleet still outnumbered the human forces. His ground troops still controlled most of New Anchorage. By any objective measure, he was winning. But his soldiers were reporting something disturbing from the surface. The humans were not breaking. No matter how many of them died, the rest kept fighting, and now, more of them were arriving, not soldiers, but civilians, ordinary people who should have been running away. The Dominion conquered through fear. They broke the spirits of their enemies before they broke their bodies. But these humans seemed incapable of breaking. They kept fighting. They kept dying. They kept coming. Thesak had seen enough. "We withdraw," he announced. "This world is not worth the cost." His officers stared at him in shock. The Dominion did not retreat. The Dominion had never retreated. But Thesak understood something his officers did not. This battle was unwinnable, not because the humans were stronger or smarter or better armed, but because they would never stop fighting. They would throw every ship, every person, every last desperate soul against the Dominion until nothing was left. They would rather die than surrender. And the Dominion could not conquer a species that embraced death so readily. Kethvoran watched the Dominion fleet withdraw from his observation post. He had recorded everything, every battle, every death, every impossible sacrifice. Now he descended to the surface of Thessar Prime, walking through the ruins of New Anchorage for the first time. The colony was devastated. Buildings had collapsed. Streets were cratered. Bodies lay where they had fallen, human and Wythrak alike, their blood freezing in the cold air. The survivors moved among the wreckage, searching for the wounded, mourning the dead. He found Katie Reyes near the administration building. She was holding her daughter, a girl of perhaps 8 years old. Both of them were covered in dust and blood. Katie's hands were burned from firing a weapon until the barrel melted. She had personally killed 3 Dominion soldiers with a maintenance torch. She was crying. Kethvoran approached carefully, not wanting to intrude. But Katie looked up and saw him, and something in her eyes made him stop. "You're the observer," she said. "The Volanthi. You've been watching us." "Yes." "No. Did you get what you came for?" He considered the question. He had come expecting to document another routine conquest, another species broken by the Dominion war machine. He had found something entirely different. "I do not think I understood what I was looking for," he admitted. Katie laughed. It was a bitter sound. Exhausted. And grieving. "Neither did we. We just couldn't leave. Couldn't watch those ships come down and know we didn't try. You lost many people." "We did." Her voice broke. "So many. Friends and neighbors and people I've known for years. They're gone. They're gone. And yet you did not surrender." Katie looked at him for a long moment. Then she looked down at her daughter. At this small human child who had survived because so many others had chosen to die. "No," she said. "We didn't." Kethvoran returned to his ship that night. He sat alone in the darkness, composing his report to the Volanthi Collective. He had spent 3 centuries observing species across the galaxy, He had documented the rise and fall of civilizations. He had seen courage and cowardice, nobility and savagery. He had never seen anything like humanity. His report was brief. He wrote, "Do not threaten humanity. Do not corner them. Do not take what they love. They are not the strongest species in the galaxy. They are not the smartest or the most advanced, but they possess something we do not understand, a fire that burns brighter as the darkness grows. They will die for each other. They will die for strangers they have never met. They will die for you, if you let them call you friend. But they will destroy you, all of you, if you threaten what they love. This is why the stars should tremble, not because humanity is powerful, because humanity is human. They love each other. Not perfectly. Not always. They fight among themselves and hurt each other and fail each other constantly. But when the darkness comes, when extinction looms, they reach for one another. They burn themselves up so that someone else might live. And none of us, not the Valanthi, not the Dominion, not any species in this galaxy know what that truly means. I have watched civilizations die for 300 years. I have seen empires rise and fall like waves on a shore. But I have never been afraid. I am afraid now. Not of humanity. I am afraid of what the galaxy will become when it finally understands what humans are capable of. When it understands that this small, fragile, impossible species will never stop fighting for each other. When it understands why the stars quiver before them. He transmitted the report and sat back in his chair, watching the stars drift past his window. Somewhere out there, the human navy was finally arriving. Too late to fight, but in time to help rebuild. Somewhere down on the surface, Katie Reyes was burying her dead and planning for tomorrow. And somewhere in the darkness between stars, the Dominion was retreating, carrying with them a new understanding of humanity. They had come to conquer. They left having learned something far more important. Some species cannot be conquered, not because they are strong, but because they would rather die than abandon each other. And against that kind of love, that impossible, irrational, beautiful love, even empires must bow. The stars did not quiver because humanity was mighty. The stars quivered because humanity was human. And that, Kethvorin finally understood, was the most terrifying thing in the universe.